Well, we have made it. We've gotten to the end of the series. I know there are quite a few of you who have been here for all three. Well done. I feel like I should have made like little badges or something, and you get your little sticker there for sticking with it. But don't worry if you weren't. I really do. I hope it has been helpful for all of you listening. It has been a huge exercise, just a huge privilege to go through these talks and to just think it through and then put it to words to try and explain it to someone. So thank you all for being willing to listen to me through it. In case it is your first talk, my name is Brie. I'm married to Dan, who's the pastor at Grace Church of Greenwich, and we meet in this building on Sunday mornings. And I don't know what you want to call it, the inspiration for the talks, the reason, is because in 3 years, I lost 3 people I loved dearly, right? My dad first, and then my mom, and then my 8-year-old daughter just this past June. And so I needed to process it all, right? I had this Christian faith, I had this belief, but how does it work when this is happening? And so that's what this series has been doing. It's kind of looking into what is Christian faith? What does that Christian hope look like when we all suffer in this world? And now we've come to probably the biggest, the hardest topic. Where is God? Where is he when all of this suffering is happening? Where was he? When that first leukemia cell developed in my daughter, did he miss it? Was he off helping someone else? Where was he? When Isabel was crying out in pain from all the shots, how could a loving God possibly listen to her pain and do nothing? Where was he when she finally died? I've read this biography about Jesus. I know he healed people. I know he raised people from the dead. Why didn't he do that for Isabel? Why didn't he do it for me? When hard things happen, we have to come face to face with what we think we know about God and what we see happening around us. If God is all-powerful, why does he not use his power to stop the evil and the suffering and the brokenness? If he is all-loving, how can he watch bad things happen to anyone? And we have 2 options when we come to this decision about God, right? Our first option, we toss him out, right? And I think a lot of people have done that. I had a friend of mine recently introduce me to an author called Frederick Bachman. Yes, I think I got that one right. I got to read 2 of his books. They're really funny, very good character development, good character arcs. I love to kind of see how the character stories all kind of wove together by the end. But I started to notice a trend in both the books. The main character would have a tragedy in childhood, and so he would toss God out, right? Don't want God, if that's what he does to people. Our second option is to try to understand. Right? We can take the time to hear what God has to say. He's given us the Bible. It's called his word for a reason. This is how he's telling us what he's doing. This is how he's telling us what he's like and what his character is like. And so that's what we're going to try to do here tonight. And so I'm going to start our talk, much like I did the other 2. And we're going to read that theme Bible passage. You're probably starting to really recognize it by now. It's on the inside of our handout, and it comes from Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 32. It's a long one, and some of you may have noticed I have actually made it a bit longer tonight. I've added 2 sentences in at the end, but I think they are really good sentences for helping us understand God and what he's doing in this broken world. I'm hoping that each time we've read it, it's gotten a bit more clear each time. I bet there are still a few pieces in there that you're still like, what is going on there? That's fine. But I hope the more you hear it, the more you're hearing that argument, the more you're hearing how everything develops and comes together. But once again, my talk tonight is just going to focus on that highlighted sentence number 28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. So then why bother with the whole passage? And I think for tonight especially, context is important, right? What comes before that sentence and what comes after really helps us to understand that sentence. So as my friend Susie comes up to read the passage tonight, try and listen out for what God is doing and how he's responding to the broken world.
Okay, so as you know, it's from Romans chapter 8, beginning at verse 18 through to verse 32. For as I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he has predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things?
So I will admit that I struggled with how best to address this topic. Each draft of the talk that I made, where I tried to kind of generalize and apply this topic to all suffering, it ended up sounding kind of insensitive, right? For how could I really understand the pain of someone else's worst suffering? Right? Even within the area of losing a child, there's pain that I don't understand. My daughter did not die suddenly, and so I don't really understand the pain of my daughter being here one moment and gone the next. But neither did Isabel have to fight her cancer for years. And so I don't really understand the pain of a long-suffering child. The only pain I do know is that at this time last year, she was a normal little girl going to birthday parties, playing soccer, whining about piano, giggling with her brother. And so, at what I believe is very good advice from my husband, I'm going to instead talk through, out loud, my personal response to sentence 28 as a parent whose child died after 3 weeks of leukemia treatment. And so what are my first impressions as I read sentence 28? For those who love God, all things work together for good. You know what it sounds like? It kind of sounds like the thing that people say when they're trying to be hopeful and optimistic, right? It's going to be all right. Everything's going to be okay. And to be honest, kind of stuff makes me angry. I want to say, really? It's going to be all right? My daughter is dead. How is anything ever going to be all right again? And I think back to that night in the ICU, and I have to give the staff their credit, because I can't remember any doctors or nurses ever saying stuff like that. Right? They would say things like, "We're fighting for her. We don't lose hope very easily here." They never gave any impression of success because they knew it wasn't theirs to give. So when people say stuff like, "It's going to be okay," I want to be angry. But this isn't just anyone saying this sentence, right? It's God himself. And if anyone is actually able to make good on a sentence like this, it's him. So let's first think about that phrase, all things work together. One of the reasons I get frustrated by sayings like, "it's going to be okay," is because that person has no control over this situation, right? No way to ensure that things will actually happen, so the end result is good. But this phrase, all things work together, it gives a very different impression, right? It's a claim by God that he's in control of every aspect, right? He's in control of all things and is working them together for good. So that must mean that nothing surprises him, right? If anything did surprise him, then he really wouldn't be able to make this promise that all things are working together for good. Because what if that one surprising thing derailed the whole plan, right? What if the best good lay down this path, but that one unexpected bump in the road meant the end result was no longer good? So the implication is clear. God has to be totally in control of every little thing to make this promise. But that also means he's totally in control of even the worst events. Right? It means that the worst events were actually part of the plan that led to the best good. So God knew Isabel would only live 8.5 years. He knew exactly when that first leukemia cell would develop. He knew exactly when that infection got in her belly. He knew exactly when she would take her last breath. And I wonder how that's making you feel, knowing that her death was part of a plan that led to the best good. Is it anger? Right? Anger that with all of this control and power, this is part of your plan? Or is it confusion? Right? Confusion because you just can't see how this can lead to good. Or maybe it's fear. right? Fear that if God puts that into his plan, what could he do to me or the people I love? But I wonder how your emotions would change, knowing that God's own son would face death. And God was fully aware that it would happen. God knew every bad thing that would lead to his son's death, and it was part of his plan. God knew of the assassination plots, right? The injustice at court, the torture, the crowds cheering as his own son was killed. God knew all of this would happen, and he still said, this is the best plan, because it is for the greatest good. So before we recoil too much and dismiss God as cruel, remember sentence 32 of our reading. God did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. And even then, God was working all things together for good. So sentence 28 is certainly no longer just a nice saying we see on a fridge magnet, right? It carries with it big implications. God works all things, even the bad ones, together for good. So what is the hope? Right? We know this sentence is meant to be reassuring and hopeful. What is the assurance if it means God's in control of the bad things? Well, one great assurance is that there is an answer to the question, why? Isn't this the question we all ask when bad things happen? Why? Isn't this the answer we so desperately seek? Why? And it's only because God is in control that there is an answer. Let's think about what it will be like when I've finally reached that perfect new world. I'm going to see a beautiful new world with no fear of natural disasters. I'm going to see loads of perfectly selfless people with no fear of brain tumors, ALS, or leukemia. And I'm going to see my dad, and my mom, and my daughter. I'll get to hug them, and laugh with them, and hear their stories. And as good as that all is, I will also get to sit down with God and say, why? Why did it have to happen that way? And he'll say, let me show you. I was totally in control. I didn't miss it. Let me show you the amazing good I was able to work through that bad thing. None of your pain was wasted. I was working all things together for good. So as amazing as it will be to see my loved ones again, I'm going to get something even better. I'll understand why I had to lose them in the first place. And I know the idea of God having total control can make us uncomfortable, right? We can give him lots of control, maybe like 90, 95%. I mean, he is God after all, but not total control. That's a little crazy. But think it through, right? Let's think through that sit down I would have with God, right? I'd finally get there, knowing and hoping in a God that only has partial control. And I would sit down and I would ask him, why? And he may say, I'm sorry, right? That sickness was just too powerful. That infection happened just too quickly. Your pain was wasted. Nothing good came from your daughter's death. because I just couldn't control everything. Sentence 28 would no longer be a promise he could keep if he only had partial control. Well, maybe it's better if there's no God in control, no God at all. What happens to our question of suffering if there is no God? Well, first, it means there is no answer to the question why, right? Death is random. There's no purpose. My daughter Isabel, she just got a bad hand. And second, if God is not working all things together for good, guess who has to? Me. Right? I am now left with the task of making good come out of this bad. Right? Life's given me lemons. I got to make lemonade. And while it sounds logical, do you even realize how heavy a burden it is for someone like me, someone who's been dealt the unimaginable hand? So now, not only do I need to heal from this gaping wound in my heart, I also have to make sure that good comes out of the very thing crushing me. And I know that people can recover and heal. I know healing happens, but that's not what's being asked here. I'm charged not just with healing, but making sure good comes out of it. It is a crushing responsibility to put on a parent who's lost a child, on anyone who's faced the unimaginable. And the sad reality is, I'm going to fail. Right? How could I possibly live a life worthy of her death? If it's up to me, she will have died in vain, and it would be completely my fault. So, is it hard to trust that God is working all things, even the bad things, together for good? Yeah. But I hope we're starting to realize that there's really great assurance because of it. That incredibly heavy burden of making good come out of the bad, it's no longer on my shoulders. And there is an answer to the question, why? But I have to wait. And it's not just wait, it's trust that there really is an answer, and it led to the best good. But trusting can be hard, especially after something as painful as losing a child. Can God really work even this bad thing for good? And the amazing thing is, God has not asked me to trust blindly, right? To just grit my teeth and trust with no evidence. God has actually answered the question, why? Once in history. The most evil acts in history were done against his compassionate and loving Son. And why? So God could give imperfect people, like you and me, access to a perfect new world. His Son experienced the worst this world could throw at him, so God could give us the best. And so we have proof that he can work great good through awful things. And if God can work such great good for his own Son, surely he can do that for his other children as well. But there's another question we've kind of danced around this entire talk. We got hints of it when we thought about Jesus' death. But the next big question to think about, what is the good? Right? What does that phrase, for good, really mean? Well, what do we want the good to be? And I think because sentence 28 is so often read in isolation, right? It's up on a fridge magnet or it's on a calendar. We deceive ourselves into thinking that the best good is our health or our prosperity, right? God can work my education, my relationships, my personality, my experiences, my fitness regime, right? He can work all these things together for good, right? So that I have a good job, so that I live the best life now, so that health scares are not an issue. And of course, God provides even those good things, health and jobs and friends. But now that we've spent so much time on the context of this passage, we know it's not the main thing sentence 28 is trying to tell us. Right? The immediate context tells us the all things of that sentence is primarily the hardships of this broken world, right? The groanings of creation, the groanings of people. God is giving assurance that even when the job loss comes or the health scare comes, He is working those things together for good. So then what is the good? Right? What is the greatest good God is working toward, even in our sufferings? And the answer is actually right in the following sentence. In sentence 29, we see that God is conforming us to the image of His Son. God desires us all to be transformed into, to look like Jesus, both in our character, but also where He is. And doesn't it make sense? Right? Would God's greatest good that He's working, right, the ultimate goal of God's, would it be in this broken world? Right? God is focusing His efforts on the only things that are eternal, people and that perfect new world. Since we had already thought about how our character would be transformed in the second talk, tonight I'm just going to focus on where God is bringing us. Right? He wants to bring us where Jesus is, to that perfect new world. God is excited about that perfect new world and bringing people to it. Why wouldn't He? Right? It's finally going to be a world with none of the stuff God hates, right? The evil, the pain, the suffering. A place where people love each other perfectly. This is how God always wanted the world to be. And this is the greatest gift He can offer us. Life, eternal, in a world of perfect bliss. I'm not sure if you have ever experienced a moment of bliss in your life. It's pretty rare to get it all the things lined up. But it happened to me once. I can remember it. I was about 12 or 13. We were at our family beach house, this sad little house, essentially held together by Band-Aids. But it was comfortable, right? It was home for us for the summer. And I was lounging on a bed reading a book. And the windows were open, so the ocean breeze was coming through. And I had the moment, right? My body temperature was perfect. It wasn't too hot, too cold. My stomach was satisfied, not too full, not too hungry. Right? My heart was happy. I knew my family was downstairs. And I didn't want to move. I can remember sitting there like, I didn't want to scare it away, that moment of bliss. But it did, right? I probably started to sweat because it was summertime, or my brothers came to tease me or something, right? The bubble burst, but I had it. I felt that moment of bliss. The perfect new world. It's going to be that feeling of bliss, of joy, never ending. The bubble will never burst. Nothing will scare the joy away. I'm kind of glad we get new bodies because I don't think this heart could contain it. This is what God's working toward. He wants people to have this joy, to be a part of this perfect new world. Here is the greatest good that any of us could ever hope for. Life in a perfect new world, filled with people who didn't deserve to be there. How generous, how good God truly is. But if this is the greatest good, the goal that God is working toward, I want to kind of think about that now. What does that mean for my daughter Isabel, but also for us here now? So what does it mean for Isabel? She experienced a lot of pain and suffering in those final few weeks of her life, but especially when she died, we question, what did she ever do wrong? Why is she being punished? Right? Death is a bad thing. It robs people of what life has to offer. Isabel missed out on growing up, getting married, having kids, enjoying this world. But pause and think. Isabel is perfected now. She's experiencing joy, never ending. Every aspect that we saw growing, every seed of good we had seen started, right? It's come to fulfillment. Her welcoming spirit, her encouraging words, her love has reached its complete and perfect end. The only things she missed out on are losing her hair from chemo, getting sick from the medicine, being isolated for 2 years while being treated. And then don't forget petty arguments with friends, jealousy with her brother, rejections by boyfriends, possible depression, drug addictions, anxiety, abuse, pain, as she and everyone she loves suffers in this broken world. She is not missing out. She is perfected, enjoying a life that we all dream of. For Isabel, all things truly did work out for good. But now, what does it mean for us here? Right? If the greatest good that God is working toward is making us like Jesus, both in what he's like, but also where he is, what does it mean for us now? And I think the hardest implication for us now is actually trusting that the path we walk is actually the best path, the one designed for the greatest good. Every bump in the road, every valley we are led through is designed to get us home, to get all God's children home. We cannot fathom how any good can come from the death of a child. Right? There are about a dozen other ways God could have written Isabel's story. Right? She could have endured the leukemia treatments. And her friends would have had to learn how to be selfless and loving and caring for a friend that's isolated. She could have become best friends with the other girl in Greenwich who survived leukemia. And they could have rallied together to raise money to cure cancer. She could have become a pediatric oncologist who knows exactly what her patients are facing. But that's not what happened. She died. And we are called to trust that this really is the best path toward the greatest good. And I will admit that just because I am called to trust does not mean I understand. Perhaps because I'm giving these talks, or perhaps because I seem so confident in the God that I trust. You may get the impression that I understand why this had to be the best path. I don't. I really, really don't. Day after day, I walk around with this hole in my heart. I have to pass by her empty room every morning, and I feel our loss. Every school pickup, I see big sisters with their little brothers, and I see how much our family has lost. Every 9th birthday and 10th birthday and 11th birthday of her friends only reminds me of how much I've lost. And I look around me and I just don't see enough good to justify that loss. And of course, I've experienced good. There has been great good, so much love and caring and texts and meals and just visits. So much good. But did it balance out the cost of losing her? Will I ever see enough good in this life to feel like it justifies losing Isabel? I really don't think so. But does that mean it's not happening? God never promised that I'll understand what he's doing right now. But he has promised that one day I will. One day he will show me just how much good he was able to do through this awful, awful thing. One day I will sit back in awe of all that he accomplished through Isabel's death. One day, Isabel will look at me in all her perfection and say, "You get it now, Mom? Do you see now why this really was the best way?" One day. So as we bring this final talk to a close, I don't want to miss spending time on our final phrase in sentence 28. For those who love God. The promise of sentence 28, the assurance and hope of a God who works great good out of the worst, is only for those that love him. But while these promises are limited to his children, anyone can become a child of God. None of us rightly belong to his family. None of us are children of God by birth. No, we are all adopted into this family by our loving Father. So if you want answers to your why questions, if you're feeling crushed by the burden of making good come out of the worst, if you want the greatest good that God is offering, this perfect new world, God's waiting for you, right? He's waiting for you to call out to him and say, "I need you. This world is broken. I am broken. And I can't get to that new one on my own. I need Jesus to help me." And with that one plea, your suffering will be transformed. But hear this clearly. Suffering will still come. I cried out to the Lord 21 years ago, right? I admitted I needed his help. I needed Jesus to save me. Not knowing the worst suffering I would ever face was yet to come. The suffering is going to hurt. It's going to be confusing and hard. But now, You're not fighting it alone. Your Father is with you. Every tear has a purpose. All the pain has meaning. All of it will be worked together by your Father who longs to bring his children home, home to a world of never-ending joy and perfected, selfless hearts. No more bubbles will burst. No more goodbyes or sorries. Just perfection. Reunions and stories. Stories of how even the worst suffering brought unimaginable joy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take 5 to 10 minute break to kind of let it sit in, process, think. You'll notice that there are some question sheets on your table. And this will give you a chance to see if there is something lingering out there that you feel like I haven't talked about. Please jot it down. I've also, on the back of the handout, are the previous 2 talks that I gave. Their outlines are there. And so maybe it'll help jog the memory if there was something lingering from those talks. If you need to leave, that's fine. I know babysitters need to be relieved and all that. But if you want to hang around, we're going to have a question and answer session in about 5 to 10 minutes. So I'll see you back up here in a little bit. It's hard to know where to start. I feel like I should shuffle them or something. So many good questions. Thank you, ladies, for being honest. There's some real honest and hard ones here. Maybe I'll start with this one. Yeah. The question is, when were you able to see this verse 28 without incredible anger? I will say, by God's grace, I never did. I never looked at it in anger. I looked at it in confusion. So my response was confusion. I didn't understand what was happening. I really couldn't put it together. And I still don't, as was evidenced by the talk. And I think that the big role was I had a really good foundation in place. And so when I fell hard, it was there to catch me. And I wasn't going through it alone. I had a lot of people. And actually, this is going to kind of tie into this question here. How do we encourage each other after loss? I know for me, I surrounded myself and pulled in as many Christians as I could. I needed people to speak truth to me because I couldn't think for myself. And it was doing a lot of what these talks did for you. I mean, it was pulling all the same verses. It was pointing me to the reality of where Isabel is. It was these beautiful pictures of her kind of knocking on the wall and saying, I'm great, it's wonderful here, I can't wait for you to come. You know, so many of these great verses people were encouraging me with. But also it was that presence, and I think there was another one in here, of just people being with me. And some of the things I appreciated the most, it's going to sound weird, is not being embarrassed to do the ugly cry hug. I cried ugly. I didn't know I could make the sounds I made after all of that. But to stand with me and be like, this is who I'm with, you know, in the middle of a hospital, on the front porch, in the middle of church, right, when everybody's walking around you and I'm a mess. To do that and just be like, I'm here. That is a big thing. And prayers. I know there are so many have just sent the prayer texts and the prayer, even just kind of, I'm praying for you, I'm here, I'm thinking about you. Sending songs, I needed songs. Songs were great for me. Songs with lots of great Bible truth. So they would be singing and they'd be that ear bug, right? That thing that gets stuck in your head. And so it's like when I'd feel down, it would start singing to me. So those were a lot of the great things that I took away from my experience there. And I think that kind of answered this question here, what can we do to help you? Is it better to remember Isabel with you, or is it better to be quiet and still? It's a little bit of both. And sometimes I am just going to need the hug. Not from Suzette. You make me cry every time. Terrible. It's terrible. No. God's grace, I am able to talk about her. You know, I'm able to say her name without falling apart. And I think a big part of that is because I know where she is. And I have a truth that is based on fact, is based on evidence and proof. And so I fall back onto that, be like, no, this is real. And I feel, and it gets into me sometimes, especially I'm standing at her grave. And I'm like, this is my reality. Is this real? Am I just deluding myself, thinking that there's something better coming, a perfect world's coming? It's like, no. Jesus walked this earth. He did what he did. He died and raised again. Like, those are facts in history. Now, a lot of people, it takes a lot to get people to actually look into that, right? A lot of it is just like, it seems like fantasy. But it's the same thing for me. That's what happened 21 years ago. I looked into those facts of history, and I was convinced that this is real. This is real. What was another? Let's see. I think that's my hard one. And I kind of addressed this one. Was there something that was said to you that was encouraging, to point to you, remind you of this hope? I think we kind of did that. How do you best respond to someone who doesn't believe in God? Because if there was a God, there wouldn't be so much suffering, especially in particular with the suffering of children. It's the classic argument, right? If God is all-powerful and all-loving, right? So he has the power to do anything, to stop anything, and he's all-loving, so he would never let bad stuff happen, then there shouldn't be any suffering. And that's the kind of argument of, therefore, there's no God, right? If there's a powerful and loving God, there wouldn't be suffering. The one false assumption there is that there could be a purpose behind the suffering. And I don't want to say that lightly. And it helps that there was a purpose in the suffering of his son. We fall back to that. Come back to the worst suffering, the worst evil this world ever saw. And there was great purpose in it. So like, it is hard. It's hard if someone is suffering, especially with a loss of a child or a child that's in pain. But it doesn't mean that God can't do good out of it, right? Just because we're limited doesn't mean he is. He can work great good out of the worst things. And this one I think was the hardest one for me to really think through. What would you say to an unbeliever with cancer and a poor prognosis? It was a hard question in one sense because I wasn't sure if the unbeliever was the person writing the question or if it's a person that they love and they're a believer. So if it's the person writing the question, if you are an unbeliever with cancer, I'm sorry. That's a heavy load. It's a heavy load. It's scary because now you're coming face to face with the worst enemy we will all face, and it's death. But what I hope that we were able to look at tonight is that there was one who conquered death. And he is giving that promise of life to us, right? Jesus died and he came back and he said, I will give you eternal life, right? You have to trust in me, though. You have to rely on me and depend on me. But if this unbeliever is a loved one, going through cancer with a poor prognosis. I would definitely say, I think Susie was helping me a little bit with this, but like pray for soft hearts, pray for the opportunity to talk. I don't know how much this unbeliever has rejected, or maybe they haven't even heard. But it could be just that conversation of, can I tell you about some talks I went to really recently? They really helped me out. And maybe just start and try and summarize them. It's a great challenge for you. See if you can summarize the talks I gave of this world is broken. Right? It's full of sickness. It's not meant to be. But we have a hope, and it's because of what Jesus did while he was here on earth. And then I would also, I think there's actually, I've come to learn this a lot, especially over this past year, just the power of praying out loud to someone or with someone. Because in that act of praying out loud, you are actually then praying it yourself. And you get to hear the truths as somebody is praying for you. So if you find it really hard to kind of write a sermon to tell someone, say, can I pray with you? Pray, man, because you're going to speak honestly then, right? You're going to say, this is hard and it's scary, God. Help us to understand. And if you can't, help us to look to Jesus and understand him. Help us to understand what he went through, right? And so I think that can end up being a great way to actually tell the gospel, to tell others about Christianity, is by praying with them. And I think that'll wrap us up for tonight. I don't have any other questions. If there are further questions, please come get in touch with me. I did have one announcement. Our Christianity Explored course is going to start up this coming Thursday. It's going to be at 6 p.m. in here. Dinner, childcare is provided. And just, I wasn't sure who was here when I announced it, but it's a course where you just get the opportunity to talk. It's not like this, so I'm not going to get up and give a talk again. It'll be around a table, it'll be discussion. We'll have a short video, which will help us to think about questions. And then we can just go from there. It'll give us that chance to ask those questions that you're like, I've never really thought about that. Can we talk about that? And so it's just that kind of great opportunity to get either back into Christianity if you've it was part of childhood, and you haven't come back, or if you've never looked into it at all. So if you're interested, you could take one of the question sheets and put your info on there and just give it to that lovely lady, Christina, over there, who has helped us so much with making it look pretty here. I did nothing to make it look pretty. But thank you all so much. Have a good night.